Hello again, this is John the Reformed Druid, and this week's video is for week 4 is what is your take on the Wheel of the Year? And as far as I am personally, and before I was a Reformed Druid, my take on the Wheel of the Year, it was actually very Irish, I think. Like I stated in a previous video, I learned the Wheel of the Year in a classroom setting when I was in college during basically our Irish history class segment, and looking back in retrospect, I was a bit spoiled that I had that opportunity, and so I was able to learn at least the local pronunciations. The only thing that seemed a little inconsistent with what I've observed ever since my study abroad in Ireland was the instructor's pronunciation of Lunasa. So it's taken me a long time to pronounce it Lunasa because they would pronounce it Lunasha with the SH sound and the stress on a different syllable. And so, I mean, I don't make a big deal out of that. I know usually it's the pronunciation of Samhain that people will have a cow over or throw a fit if somebody mispronounces it. And I learned that Samhain was the Celtic New Year, and to a degree that made a lot of sense. And though I always thought it's like the winter solstice seemed a bit more fitting as a new beginning, but I know there are plenty of different interpretations about that, and I think it's great that there can be other interpretations of it. But once I wandered into Reformed Druidism, I was looking at the literature that had been developed over the last 5 decades, and I was surprised when I noticed something that kind of fell in line with how I practiced, and it was more of an accidental coincidence that for me, in my personal practice, I have traditionally had a hard time keeping track of the equinoxes. And so all of a sudden it would be like a week past the equinoxes, and I was like, oh, I missed the equinox, and I wanted to celebrate that in my own way. And then here it's like, oh, Samhain's just in a couple more weeks. Maybe we'll just skip the equinox this time and we'll aim for the next one. And so like spring equinox would come and it would go, and I'd be like, oh, whoops, kind of forgot about that one too. But in the Reformed Druid tradition, based on the historical resources that they were able to find when they were kind of hashing everything out, they also left out the equinoxes entirely. Like, there is no mention of the equinoxes in the early books of the liturgies or the histories or customs. And actually, aside from just me forgetting about the equinoxes, a lot of what I did fell in line very similarly with the outlined customs in the Reformed Druid tradition. And so I'm going to have another reading of that from the Book of Customs. And this book is the Carleton Druid Collection. The Book of Customs, chapter the 4th. Now these are the commandments which were given concerning the observance of those days which were considered sacred to the Druids. Ye shall observe always the festival of Samhain, for it is the beginning of the period of Gethra, and also of the year. This day shall ye celebrate the lighting of great fires, for soon is the land to become cold in the time of apparent death. Ye shall celebrate on the day of midwinter, for on that day doth the sun begin again to rise in the south. So shall ye celebrate it with the burning of logs and making merry. So also shall ye make merry on the day of Imbolc, which is the first day of the period of Arach. And on these days shall ye glorify the mistletoe and the evergreen, for it is a living testimony to the continuance of life, yea, even in the midst of a dead world. Of great importance is the festival of Beltane, which is at the beginning of Saura. Then shall ye observe great ceremony, and the kindling of large fires on the hilltops, and the glorification of the renewed tree shall ye celebrate the renewed life. Ye shall take note of the decline of sun in the sky, which doth begin on the day of midsummer. Ye shall light your fires and let them die, in token of the great fire which doth roll down the sky, even as a ball doth roll down a hill. Lunasa, which is the beginning of the period of Fohar, shall ye mark the coming together in groups, in order that ye might feast upon the fruits of the Earth Mother. And then shall ye offer up a sacrifice unto your prosperity. So, and that is the entirety of the Book of Customs, chapter the 4th, where it entirely omits any mention of the equinoxes. So, nowadays, the equinoxes are definitely incorporated in, and there's no set guidelines or rules or anything. And of course, there are disclaimers in these collections of books that mention that, like, these are not dogma, and they're just merely guidelines that you can observe as a Reformed Druid. And if you feel like using the traditional customs, then by all means, that's why this literature is here. One of the key differences between most other traditions and the Reformed Druids is the Reformed Druid New Year. And that is because the Reformed Druid tradition had basically had its official start on Beltane in 1963. And so they counted that as, they actually started counting Beltane as year one of the Reform. And so basically, there was no year zero, but I consider there being a year zero as being like the pre-planning stages and trying to figure out what it was they're going to try to do. And so right now in the Reformed Druid calendar, this is year 53 of the Reform. And there is an offshoot of the Reformed Druids that is the New Reformed Druids of North America, and they take their rituals in a markedly more pagan direction, whereas for Reformed Druidism, like vanilla, it's very much open source, that whatever your current spiritual practice is, if you can make it fit into like a Reformed Druid viewpoint, then you can consider yourself a Reformed Druid. Now, a lot of people said that was really wishy-washy, but on the other hand, it's been able to be inclusive of so many more types of spiritual backgrounds, and it's been able to embrace so many people on a diverse level. So, but I was going to say that the new Reformed Druids, they had their beginnings on a Samhain. So their New Year is half a year off from the Reformed Druid New Year, but at least for the new Reformed Druids, it does coincide with the Celtic New Year. So it's interesting when we're trying to figure out, like, if a Reformed Druid and a new Reformed Druid are having a conversation and they're trying to figure out when something happened, and the calendar systems are off by not only a few years, but there's a half year as well. But yeah, calendar systems are probably the least of Reformed Druids' concern, I think. That is my current interpretation of the Wheel of the Year. Thank you for watching this week.